All right. Good day. Here we are.
Hello.
I'm Jen
Yeah,
Brzeli.
I'm Kyle Godby, and these are our field notes from the swamp.
So you had a conversation this morning that we thought might be
I
good
did.
to.
It's got me thinking since having that conversation, and it starts with the metaphor as service designers we love to use about the orchestra. How I think I got hooked into this one early, and not too long ago, I shared an image in a sort of service design 101 presentation of the orchestra, and I had a good quote that will come back to me in the next couple of minutes, but I can't remember it exactly. But it was a conductor that was, I think he was saying that um, the role of a conductor within an orchestra is not to be heard; it's to amplify the voices and connect the voices of everyone else within the orchestra. And I found that resonant. I also find the idea that harmony is not the same as tempo. It is not everything working in sync, but it is with things that are able to conjoin and create an interesting thing in unison, but it not being regimented in that it's not sameness. It's actually differentiation that creates something harmonious. So I like all of those concepts.
Yeah.
But what came up in this conversation was, isn't it also all about the control of the conductor? And yes, that's it. That's why I've stopped using this. So what comes up for you when you hear
Okay.
the
Okay. First of
orchestra?
all, love this because I feel like this metaphor is both everyone's favorite and everyone's like villain.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and I do think, like you just mentioned, there are very many things within this metaphor that I think people, even of the complexity systems kind of community, there's plenty for us to love about it,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's plenty to bristle at. The control thing is interesting because immediately, um, it's not the conductor who controls the orchestra. I also don't know a ton, so I'm speaking well outside, I'm way over my skis, so to speak. But my limited understanding is like the conductor isn't actually the guy controlling what is happening. He is providing a level of scaffolding, and he
Mm-hmm.
does have the ability to kind of, whatever, make small nudges and tweaks and modulations. But this actually ties back to one of our recent episodes where I think I talked about the distributed villain, and you gave an
Mm-hmm.
example about leaders who themselves feel like they're beholden to a system. What is it that is
Hmm.
dictating
It's
what
the
is
sheet
happening?
music.
That's
Yeah.
right. It ain't fucking human.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the humans of the past who wrote the sheet music. So, yeah,
Right.
right. So there's like generational stuff there. But anyway, I just find this rich because it is easy to dismiss this metaphor. Again, in service design, which is all about orchestration, the
Mm-hmm.
noun, trying to orchestrate an
Right.
experience. And I think appreciating the complicatedness, I'll say, of all the bits and pieces that go into mediating an experience, I think to make the comparison to orchestration, I get it. I get why it's powerful. But I, like a lot of folks, won't use it on purpose very often because it does imply the ability to pre plan or orchestrate.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely domains where you can do that, of course. And also
Sure.
classical music is wonderful. Like I want orchestras to
Yep.
exist and play classical music.
Absolutely.
But I suspect this conversation that you had this morning was to some extent generated by someone's either discomfort or itchiness about the metaphor, and again, in what context? If someone is saying this needs to be a tightly controlled process, in an environment where that's really not likely to be effective, then it's a problem to talk about orchestration. And then you got to pull out everyone's favorite jazz metaphor in place of it, right? So it's
Right.
jazz, it's
Oh,
improv.
we'll dig in
We've
there.
we've talked about
Absolutely.
this a little before, but
Oh
like,
yeah.
jazz is also not just free for all, which is an important distinction for people. And there's a level of structure behind what
Yes.
leads to improvisation in jazz, and they've studied their instruments, they've
Mm-hmm.
mastered technique, they know how to read each other's body language. So I get the like complicated versus complex, orchestra versus jazz ensemble, get it. There's a reason those are so overused. But I don't know, man, don't throw away the orchestra metaphor altogether because it's
No,
rich. You just need a couple of things. I think the tempo versus harmony piece is super generative, I think, for people to think about what does it mean to orchestrate as a verb. And also think about the role of the conductor, as I was saying earlier. Like, he's not
Yeah.
controlling anything. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
what is everyone's role in relation to each other? And
So the way I think of the conductor though is as it's an interpretation of the sheet music. They do have a
mhm.
bit of control over that, not just during the performance, but who am I going to invite to the performance? How am I going to assemble my orchestra to produce
Well,
this?
yeah.
And
Does the
what comes to
conductor
mind,
decide that stuff?
I believe, I think
I
they're
don't
the
know this
primary component of this. And I've never been part of an orchestra before, but I've
Spoken like someone who
I've
wants
been
to tear
within the
apart.
echo range. Yeah. I might be, somebody can correct me if I'm
Oh,
totally off, but
I love Kyle and Jen both talking about something they know nothing about, which is how actual
let's,
I have friends who work as part of orchestras too. I'll have to go
let's
ask.
absolutely. Yeah. Invite them into this conversation. Um, I what I was suddenly thinking of as another metaphor, because we need more metaphors, compounding metaphors, is it's like doing a performance of Shakespeare. The script has been written. There's no room for
Funny, I was going to
improv,
say
but
earlier, plays. Yes, the
yeah,
play, front stage,
but
backstage.
reinterpretation
Mhm.
within the realm of
Yes.
the script is available to the director.
Hmm.
To an extent, uh, the actors, but with permission from the other actors and
Right.
the director. And so, jazz, I think, is a little bit different, where, or even jam bands, where it's not quite as, there isn't a hierarchy of permission. There is a coherence that people will get locked into for the most part. You know, you're talking about Ornette Coleman and free jazz, and things have very, very little structure. But it still works with the assemblage of, I'm not going to get six bass players together and call this a jam band. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't create, I've never seen that work. How about that? That's the right way. We could try it. I've
Yeah.
seen bands bring together two bass players before, and that looks bizarre. And I don't know that it's actually worth anything, because you can't say this is really benefiting it. I've seen, drummers and percussionists work together and known that there are two people that are working the rhythm section, and
Yeah.
it being apparent. But I'm going off on a different tangent now. But the interpretation, there's still a centralized component to uh, the orchestra that I think is unique. I think where some of the itchiness was like, we're going into uncharted territory, we need to
Right.
harmonize. There's a okay there, but also, like, where do you want the deviation? Where do you want
Right.
room for emergence? Where do you
Right.
want the discovery? All
Exactly.
that kind of stuff. That
Yeah.
doesn't come from sheet music or interpretations.
Exactly. I think the reason that this metaphor is both appealing in some places is the exact same reason that it is actually not a good metaphor and ineffective in
Mm-hmm.
other places, right? So it is that either it's choreographed, it's scripted, it's composed in advance. And the
Yep.
implication is if everyone does their job, like Bill Belichick, like do your job, right? Like
Yep.
there is this sort of feeling, especially if you are running a giant enterprise or um, a big or complex in the colloquial sense team, there is that like instinct that in order to have everybody working shoulder to shoulder in alignment, there's that word, it requires both a well scripted slash planned slash orchestrated slash whatever amount of work in advance, and it requires people to do their part,
Yep.
read their part, follow your part, and don't deviate too much. But any deviation that's going to happen needs to actually be done by someone who can see the whole, hence your point about the conductor. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that is a really good one to call out. That is, there is this sneaking kind of I don't know, like an insidious belief that if we're going to have everything be relatively tightly controlled, but we are going to allow for some human something to happen here, that can only happen from or guided by someone who can see the whole. And I do wonder sometimes if like the conductor and orchestra metaphor
Mm-hmm.
is like part of the reason that so much of systems thinking gets into that. It's like, I got to see the system. Only
Right.
the conductor can see all the parts of the orchestra
Yeah, the
and go, okay,
balcony.
trumpets, you guys are overdoing it. Take it down a notch, and like
Mm-hmm.
over here, strings, we're going to pick up the pace on this, whatever. I'm making it up. I don't know how
Yeah.
conductors, I need to go read about what conductors do now. I know a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
regardless, I think that dynamic, and we all, not we all, but many of us, probably most people listening, we know that the idea of having a holistic view and
Mm-hmm.
controlling from the outside is not how anything works in a complex system made of humans, who are working together, but in very different ways to achieve, certain things. The people who are playing their instruments are in many ways the specialists in this metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And this metaphor is comforting to people because it has this promise that if somebody can see the whole and everybody else puts their head down and does their part as written, that the result is going to be beautiful. And in symphonies, it is beautiful because it's a
Mm-hmm.
controlled, closed
That's it.
system,
Yeah.
right? Now, is your workplace a controlled, closed system? And take, for example, experience design, right? Which is a big part of what we talk about with services and stuff. People like to trot out the Disney example when it comes to this kind of stuff. And they talk
Mm-hmm.
about front stage and backstage employees and who you see at Disney and who you don't, and those famous like steam tunnels, or not steam tunnels, the service tunnels like under
Yeah.
the sea. You don't see the backstage employees. And but the one thing people lose sight of in that world is that there is an important actor or artist who is part of the orchestra when it comes to delivering experiences, and that is the customer, the user. And
Mm-hmm.
they didn't get a script book. They didn't get sheet
Right.
music. In fact, there is no sheet music written for them. So a lot of the kind of work that people wish they could apply the orchestra metaphor to is like having to actually perform a symphony. But in addition to all these incredibly trained musicians who all have sheet music and have years of practicing on all of this stuff, and a conductor, you also are inviting other humans who don't have any instruments and have no training and actually don't have any need or desire to play an instrument to come in and be part of the symphony. How's it going to go then? So I
Yeah.
think you and I are obviously already both on the same page about the nature of this metaphor, but it doesn't scare me too much when my clients want to use it. I
Mm-hmm.
just, to the point we've kind of made, steer people to understand why there are aspects of it that are appealing if they're using it to contrast it with something that is no good and it
Yeah.
represents a progression. Like you mentioned earlier, you can really do a lot with ideas around harmony and tempo and the idea that different people have different roles to play. And but when it becomes a function of the scripted,
Mm-hmm.
choreographed, planned, everyone just keep your head down, one other person's at the flight deck, that's where there's room to kind of blow this thing up a little bit.
Yeah. You mentioned Belichick, and I won't dig into
Like
Belichick too
sports.
much, but the what I was just thinking about was I wonder if the football metaphor, not that we need more sports metaphors in our corporate world,
No, I
but
don't find them.
yeah, um, I now have to, like, I find that I have to explain them, and if I have to explain all my metaphors, they're falling flat.
Yeah, if
You
we have
know,
to explain the joke, it's not.
yeah, exactly. But it's also it's different. For football, for anyone that doesn't understand football, that's watching.
Yeah.
You line up on the defensive side of the ball or the offensive side of the ball. And the offensive side is a little bit more like you read the playbook, do the play, and you're up against an opposition. They don't want you to complete the play, the other team, but there's still a few options within that space. Usually there's a little bit of dynamics. Obviously, there's a bit of the most talented players are the ones that do a little bit of improvising. There's only so much room for that, but are still able to create space and create plays and that sort of stuff. But on the defensive side of the ball, what came to mind was there's an anticipatory component. It's a little bit more, do we all know the same thing? Can we all work harmoniously? But that harmony is a little bit more like the free jazz or the jam band, where it is, we don't know exactly how things are going to be thrown at us, but can I anticipate your move? If I move to the left, can I make sure that that other person is going to be covered by this other person? And knowing what they know, now I feel like I can operate within this system.
Yeah.
And so they acknowledge the interdependencies through that anticipation and are able to coordinate within that individually. but also
Yeah.
compensating and responding to how other people are working around them. That seems
Yeah.
like it's a little bit closer to what we're trying to say. It doesn't work as a good metaphor because there's too much explanation that has to go into it unless you're really
Absolutely.
familiar
Plus,
with
it's really
defense
easy to
coordination.
grab pieces of each of these to illustrate a point. But yeah, I mean, this was actually, it's funny, in the article I wrote about like hockey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I knew people were going to come for me because there's a part in that article for anyone who hasn't read it. It's just about hockey and complex systems, and you probably like it. Go find it. But
I
basically,
recommend it.
there's a part in that article where I say something like, you could argue hockey in this way is like a complex system, whereas football is merely complicated in the Kneven sense. It's not
Mm-hmm.
literally. It's not literally. I had to do that. I chose to do that to draw some contrast to make a point, and I kind of knew. I even made a point to say in the article, it's not like that. But I knew some people were going to come for me, and like I actually did have a lot of people respond in various places to kind of talk about this because they thought it was interesting, and a lot of people were like, "Yeah, the first like 10 seconds, after the ball snapped, that you are executing a play on offense, and then from there." Deviations, iterations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like things happen, and it probably is no longer merely complicated, and it becomes a complex system. And yeah, yeah, yeah. But on the defensive side, they do still call plays. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
why your example here is interesting because it isn't that the offense has a playbook and their goal is to follow or to execute it as clearly as they can, while the defense is merely trying to read, and
Right.
anticipate and respond. They do still operate with a play and some play calling, but understanding everything you just said.
Yeah.
So I do think it's rich. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, again, my eyes roll out of my eye sockets when I hear the overuse and abuse of sports metaphors in business. But
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a reason that it is as common as it is, and that is because more people probably have some level of proximity to or touch with sports than with, say, orchestras,
Yeah.
right? So, like, the orchestra and the theater example abound in service design because so much of service design is really using the metaphor of front stage, backstage, script, choreography, planning,
Mm-hmm.
orchestrating. Um, but I also think that it's again, to what end? Like, why do we even care to chat about this stuff? Like, if you think about where these show up, either you're trying to explain something to somebody, or often sometimes people are they read about or see a metaphor used and they find it compelling and they're using it to communicate like a need. And this came up recently, and I know I've talked in other places maybe recently about take a project where a client is asking you to simply map an ecosystem or create a
Mm-hmm.
service blueprint for things, and they might be, in this particular example I'm thinking of, relatively like new to this way of thinking, and they might be saying, I recognize that the organizations that we're trying to work with and partner with are extremely complex. And I just need to have like a better understanding of how things unfold. And so I'd like to have a service blueprint that is a description of the current state. So we're not even thinking
Mm-hmm.
about aspirational future state. It's like, I just want to see a map. And they've used the orchestration metaphor a little bit. And what I'm hearing them say is, I don't understand how music is getting made. And so if you show me a map of where the people sit and what each of those people is doing, that would be so helpful to me.
Yep.
And I don't hear them wanting to abuse the orchestra metaphor in a way that makes me itchy, even though I know it's not actually a very good or apt metaphor for the systems that they're trying to map. But I'm not about to be like, okay, no, okay, the systems you're trying to work with are far more like a jazz ensemble than an orchestra, even though we like to pretend that things are really orchestrated. Trust me, they're not. Like, I'm not about to do that because the process of going through this together, should we do something like this together, me and this
Mm-hmm.
client, the process is going to reveal to them that having the map of where the orchestra is laid out and where the people sit will probably be useful to them on a certain level because they
Sure.
don't even have that understanding of the landscape in which activities occur. So for
Mm-hmm.
them, it's more like a seating chart. And you only kind of realize after a certain point in time how not useful a seating chart is by having the seating chart and then comparing it to what you see in reality. But if you don't have the seating chart in front of you, you don't even recognize that there's a gap between the two.
Right.
So, in
Yeah.
some ways, in a meta way, this is one of the reasons I've gotten a lot more comfortable with, like, you know what? Any metaphor can do almost anything you need it to do if you're careful with it or if you're creative or smart with it, rather than, okay, no, we are not this, we are this, which there are times where that's useful too. Another good one is
Yeah.
traffic. The other thing I hear all the time whenever I hear orchestra or theater
Hmm.
versus like improv or jazz, I know that a traffic metaphor is not far behind. And
Sure.
it's the traffic that is directed by traffic lights,
Hmm.
versus say rotaries or roundabouts, and the notion that folks will cognitively offload the decision making of when to go or when to stop to the stoplight versus you allow traffic to flow through a roundabout and people find a way to safely engage with each other by learning how to sense and respond to the system they're in. And there is actually
With
really good,
exceptions. Hmm.
yeah, there is actually good research that that is true to an extent. Roundabouts are actually way safer and have far fewer accidents than
Hmm.
an intersection with stoplights, things like that. But there's a lot of interpretation on top, layered right on top of that. And there are other
Hmm.
factors at work besides just me having to sit at a stoplight and the like social contract I have with other drivers. It's very different in different countries. It's very different
Yeah.
even within parts of this country. And anyway, so I just,
I
yeah.
I grew up in New York. We've got we call them traffic circles. We had traffic circles from the day that I learned to drive, and it's normalized. They just started putting them in down here in Virginia, in Richmond, a
How's it
few
going?
years ago. They treat the traffic circles like stop signs.
Mm-hmm.
They wait for
Mm-hmm.
the traffic circle to clear before getting on board. I'm the guy with my elbow on the horn through the whole process. But also, yield signs are treated as stop signs here. I can't figure out what the difference between a yield sign and a stop sign is. So yeah, locally, like,
That's
do we have any
interesting.
experience with this? And also, like, when I talk to people about this, they're like, it's just scary. It's like merging onto the highway trying to get into a traffic circle.
Yeah, there's a physiological response, like going into a
Sure.
tunnel. In Pittsburgh, when I used to live in Pittsburgh, there's there's a lot of tunnels in the area where there's bridges and tunnels, and
Hmm.
people really have a hard time entering a tunnel and not hitting the brakes.
Yeah.
It's like a response we all have to like the narrowing. It's people you can actually use that. There are places, in fact, they just did this a year or two ago near where I live. There's a place where people come off of a highway and they're on a pretty like a good stretch of road where it's like 40 or 50 miles per hour, and it
Hmm.
slows down very quickly into a thickly settled 35 miles an hour, and like getting people to stop. I thought this was interesting because I put two and two together afterwards. They were trying to use that same instinct to our benefit. So in going into a tunnel, you hit the brakes just because it's like the constricting of your visual field.
Sure.
You kind of just, okay, I gotta be safe. But people do it to a detrimental amount, especially during like rush hour or whatever. So like in Pittsburgh, there's signs that are like maintain speed through tunnel.
Hmm.
Dumbass doesn't say the last
Right.
part. Whereas here, then when they put this in, what they did was they actually narrowed the road a little bit, but they
Hmm.
also gave you visual cues that the road's about to narrow because they put like a little median in the middle and put some trees in it and like made it very visually obvious that things are narrowing. So like you could just keep driving at 50. There's no reason not to. It's a straight
Sure.
away. There's no intersections or anything coming up. It's just going from like a little bit more industrial to a little bit more residential area. But getting you to slow down, like a speed limit sign ain't gonna do it. But the like
Hmm.
visually narrowing piece of it. So God, man, traffic would make a real, we should find a traffic person to get on here because you are
Yeah.
in that case modulating slash, well, in this case they're not modulating anymore, they've made their decision, but they're changing the conditions of the environment
Right.
to lead to the behaviors that they want. They're not saying, hey, please slow down, or here's the speed limit sign, and expecting that to do the job alone. Yes, some people will do that. They've even got the flashing sign that if you're going too fast, it'll go, hey, you're too fast, slow down.
Yes. Hmm.
That didn't do it either. It was
Yep.
literally adding other things to the environment that take advantage of this other sort of human instinct and changing the environmental stuff to get your behavior to change and not just communicating to you like through
Fascinating.
information. So it was like
Yeah.
interesting to like think through that. But back to the metaphor piece of it, I find that like I want to see like maybe more of the like traffic circle rotary versus stoplight out there
Hmm.
because right now it's a lot more about the orchestration and similar metaphors, but exploring some of the nuances or the contradictions in that are good. Because here's another one. I grew up in a town that had at the very center of town a four-way blinking red light,
Hmm.
which you treat as a stop.
Hmm.
And you learn very quickly if you're learning to drive in that town what you do at a blinking red light. Everybody, you get to this spot and you stop. And then you take turns going in opposite directions. It's not hard. And when there's
Hmm.
a car that wants to go left, when you're going across this way, the straight person goes first and then the other person goes left. Like it's not,
Mhm.
but when I encounter that anywhere else,
Right. Yep.
nobody seems to know what to do with it. It's not hard if you
Hmm.
like work it out logically like we're doing right now. But if your body doesn't know, if it didn't spend time doing that every day from age like 16 to 19, so
Right. Well, the Northeast is interesting with traffic because to me, it wasn't a place, it's never been a place that was growing in my lifetime. It's a place that's lost people more than anything else. And some of these things have been established. They're not building a lot of new things in the Northeast in terms of, I
I
mean,
don't know. Careful about that.
all right. So where I'm from in the
I'll give
Hudson
you a counter
Valley,
example as soon as you're done.
okay, the Hudson Valley is on
Okay.
is not
So what I
deteriorating.
hear you
That's not the
saying
word,
is
but
the
it's
Hudson Valley is a dead zone,
stagnating.
no growth. Got it. Okay.
It's a lot of the there's a lot of city the everyone that's getting out of the city have been priced out of Brooklyn are moving up the river essentially. But it's still people that's there's a familiarity still, and so I had those similar
Yeah.
stoplights where I grew up, and there weren't new people coming in and disrupting that order. It was just a very local pattern that was able to persist because people weren't exchanging. But moving down south,
Yeah.
where it's much more transient. There's a bit more growth. People are coming from all different places where they learn to drive in all sorts of different ways. Where Richmond was a much smaller town, and a lot of people drove like they were in the country in the city for the most part. Still kind of drive that way. People drive through the city with their brights on all the time. It drives me absolutely
Oh,
out of my mind. And it, that the confluence of people that are now reinterpreting all of these things. One of the hardest things for me to adapt to, and I didn't even figure it out for years, is it is pretty regimented, not through anything other than we all grew up and learned to drive in the right lane and pass in the left lane. And that became a law here like 5 years ago. But I couldn't figure out why there was so much weaving on the road, and I couldn't figure out how to manage it because it was just madness, and it really had to do with me coming from a place where I'm familiar with this pattern, and then the new pattern introduced to me was totally blindsiding. And
man,
there's a lot of that.
what
It's
a
the same with
good
the traffic symbols here in the
it's
introduction.
such a good like rules and versus norms,
Hmm.
culturally kind of perpetuated slash
Yeah,
evolving things versus like outwardly or top down or externally applied protocols and policies. Like this is
yeah.
not where we started, but yeah, the example that came to mind though, because I had to chuckle. So that blinking red light in the center of the town that I grew up in, which is a small New England town that when I was growing up was probably maybe had like 7,000 8,000 people, maybe
Hmm.
I think has grown quite a lot,
Hmm.
and it was probably semi-rural would have been how it was classified growing up, and now it's suburban, but it's not like
Hmm.
it's big developed because they don't want to let that happen there. So there's not like
Right.
just more people. There were enough more people, they realized that blinking red light doesn't cut it because the lines get backed up now. So they
Right.
replaced it with a roundabout, not a
Hmm.
stoplight, but a
Hmm.
roundabout, which lets traffic flow. And there was a lot of to do, and there was a lot of like, well, most people around here, because Massachusetts does have rotaries and
Yep.
roundabouts, which are different. You can look it up if you want. But it was still a big deal, and it was an interesting shift because again, you have the red light, now you have the roundabout. But it was a good example of, and I don't really mean that that's like it disproves your point about growth or anything. I just
Hmm.
chuckled, but it's I hope the people listening are like, boy, these guys are nerds about traffic. Metaphors, guys,
Yeah,
metaphors for
exactly.
the
Nerds
people
about
that you work
metaphors.
with. Okay,
Hmm.
so what happens if you walk into an organization or you're a part of an organization who recognizes that, gee, this blinking red light is not cutting it for our needs anymore because something has changed, either in the environment or something about us has changed. What are we going to do? And when we make this shift, how are people going to respond? And how much of it is going to be effective by just deciding that this is how it's going to be versus how are people going to behave if they don't know what this protocol is all about, if they've never seen a rotary before, So
Right.
think about it a little bit.
Yeah. No, that's such a great one. The patterns you were talking about were an adaptation to the structure that had been there for enough time. Suddenly, just changing that structure requires a new adaptation, and that doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's a
Well,
great
what's
example for
interesting is you
that.
made this point, and my friend and I exchange all kinds of complaints about this because we'll still encounter people in certain parts around here where people don't seem to know how rotaries work. And
Hmm.
in the old, this is not common anymore, but in the olden days, there were some rotaries where incoming traffic actually had the right of way, which is kind of bonkers for me to even think about.
Hmm.
Most places now, cars that are already in the rotary have the right of way. So if
Yep.
you're entering, you do have to pause and yield and join the fun as there's a space.
Yep.
But there was larger rotaries still are the place where you'll see incoming cars actually have the right of way because they're coming in at a bigger clip, so it's a faster
Hmm.
clip. So either way, thinking about the adjustment, like you do still have an agreement with everyone around you that you're following the
Yeah.
quote basic rules of driving. Like we agree that we're not going to hit each other. I'm
Hmm.
keeping my hands on the wheel and I'm looking at you. And like there are like these little things that you wouldn't think to like explicitly state, but they're still part of this like unspoken social contract. And then there are also still other like rules, laws of the road. You drive on the right here, like you were saying earlier. And other signs still have meanings that we all know and agree to. So I find it interesting to think about this in relation to like what is staying true
Hmm.
that you can lean on. For people who are like, this change, we're all agreeing it's a good change, but it's weird and I don't know how to behave yet and I haven't built new muscle memory for it. But what is still true? You drive on the right, you're sitting in the spot you're
Right.
sitting in, you're still pressing the accelerator, like go down on the granularity a little bit. You press on the accelerator, you press on the brake, not to like tailgate the car in front of you. When in doubt, it's okay to wait, even if people are like honking at you. No one's going to
Hmm.
get hurt. There's a
Hmm.
difference between getting honked at and getting crashed into. Like these little things that no one makes explicit can
Yeah.
be, I think, sometimes really helpful to make explicit in those periods of transition. And again, all of this is taking as hopefully a given that like the transition is not just being like imposed from above without any thoughtfulness, because that's not the kind of work I engage in. But nonetheless, even if there's transition that everybody feels party to, it's still going to come along with this adaptation and this like discomfort. And so
Sure.
you want to go from four blinking red lights to a beautiful little roundabout with a nice little garden in the middle. Hang on to the things you know are true. They're still true,
Huh.
either because they're at a granularity that you know isn't changing, or because you've all agreed that these are some North Star things that we can all rely on. And then let the rest of it unfold. Just follow those. You'll be okay. Don't
Yeah.
hit the person in front of you.
I'm thinking. I've probably used this quote from Nora Bateson quite a few times here, but we don't just jump into shaky ground or move into uncertain spaces
Yeah.
without having something to hold on to
Yeah.
that is a bit structured and familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And to bring it back to driving and then back to jazz, it's that anticipation and trust are very much hand in hand, and that's taking for granted the rules that exist.
Yeah.
I assume that when I'm driving faster in the left lane, that people in the right lane are going to be checking their side view mirror before they change lanes. It's what allows me to drive at speed there. Otherwise, I'd be terrified of the next car in front of me, and I'd need to maintain some distance, even in a different lane. And that defies the whole purpose of having that other lane.
Yeah.
Now, if I was in an accident where that was the case, somebody just, they didn't see me and they
Mhm.
moved over.
Yep.
This is the core of trauma and PTSD, when the things that you take for granted, the bubble you've built of safety for yourself, is
Yeah.
suddenly broken
Yeah.
because the
We
rules
talked a
don't
little bit about
apply
that last.
anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and now jazz, or jam bands, or musicians that are just playing without a script, without sheet music. uh, I've seen this happen a million times, where it's that anticipation isn't just, all right, we've done 4 bars of this, we're all going to be sick of it now, necessarily. It's also hearing the drummers hitting a little bit softer, a little bit harder, hearing the
Mhm.
dynamics of how somebody is playing, knowing where somebody else might find an opportunity. And this is where time builds that relationship,
Yes.
builds that
Yes.
anticipation. And
Yes.
I mean, I people, the glances that people throw each other, that kind of just says, all right, you're up next. And they
Yep.
don't, to me, it's just a glance. To them, there's a whole unspoken language that's happening up there that's
Absolutely.
phenomenal to watch.
Yeah.
Not
And
that I'm
that's,
into like
and
the Fish jam band stuff. That's not my thing, but all the
everybody kind of
reggae
loves fish.
guys from
Kind of
Woodstock,
loves fish.
I'm not a
I
Fish
mean,
guy.
that's like, that's what I find so incredibly enjoyable about hockey. And that's what I think is so, even with the traffic example, and I think we might have talked about this before, but I always find it really interesting to point out the difference between the lane markers. They're just markers. They don't
Mm,
literally prevent you from getting out of your lane.
yep.
They're just so like there are different levels of um boundaries or rules or protocols or whatever kind of way you want to think about it in terms of how concrete or not they are. And you learn those not just by the presence of those things, but by other people around you and their behavior and whether or not they
Mm-hmm.
abide by them or not. If so, this isn't just, yeah, so let me back it up to your point about music. Like those musicians, they might notice that the drummer is starting to hit a little softer because they've developed an ear for that through
Right.
repetition and practice and just experience. And they also, as you point out, are used to working either with each other or with just musicians in general, and they're picking up for, so like developing the ear for something or developing the sensitivity to or the reading of the body language, right? These are things that people do by virtue of doing. You do it by
Mm-hmm.
doing it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that the same thing applies in so many other places. So like the traffic example isn't just that I see where the markings are. Yes, the traffic manual says that, but I also notice that other cars abide by it. In some places they don't, So like
Yeah.
that's so important. It's funny too because I think we talked about this last time, we didn't get into too much, but so much is about what other people do and what they either model or demonstrate is or isn't acceptable, or that people are willing or not willing to move outside of certain norms or codes. And so all of almost anything is a suggestion at best.
Mm-hmm.
And like the real power is in what people are willing or not willing to do together. So
Mm-hmm.
again, I mean, try to, you know, make some of the connections explicit in whatever kind of work we're doing, or even just community. I don't mean like paid work, this is all about the swamp, but like the swamp could be a lot of things. You're out there in the field trying to like bring some of this into your work. A lot of it is tied to that fact that there's gonna be something that is intended to be articulated in an informational form or a policy form or our values form or whatever it is, but it's what the people do that is the thing.
Yeah.
So work right with that directly. Just work with that right away.
You know, this is I've never really put this together quite as explicitly as I'm about to, but the silo problem that I get called into all the time. You've gotten
Yeah.
this before. We
Oh
need
yeah.
to fix the silos. I'm not in a silo. The rest of them are in a silo. They're hoarding their knowledge and their talents, and it upsets me. So let's go break down the silos so that we can all work together. And I've said a million times the silos are origin stories, their identity that's been earned and unavoidable. But what I'm thinking about now is they're not really saying I want their knowledge. I want to exploit their resources necessarily. They're saying I understand that I'm the cornerback and that other team over there is the free safety, but we don't spend any time on the field together, and so we can't play together. And I can't anticipate them. I don't have that
Yeah.
collaboration or that experience to know their body language. I feel like somebody gave us the playbook, but we're using our playbooks
Yep.
individually, segmented from each other. And this is a team sport. Or this
Mm-hmm.
is you're the drummer and I'm the bass player. We're supposed to produce rhythm together, but we don't share the same stage. We're Tool. We have to record in 5 different studios and 3 different
Yeah.
continents,
Yeah.
because we don't like each other. So that's the ask: is can I become familiar with this person, but not just the mission statement or the identity that's on the org chart for that team. I want to know how they're like when they're shifting their weight, what
Yeah.
that might mean to me and how I compensate by shifting my own weights, or when they hit that particular melody where I might find my own fill in there or be able to take it into the next melody.
Yeah. I mean, take lines in hockey. So, I mean, in hockey, you have you have lines on both offense and defense, but Won't go into that. But take an offensive line. It's three
Mm-hmm.
players. They tend to play together. Now, in professional hockey, you don't actually keep lines together permanently, but like there's some stability because those three players tend to be on the ice together and they develop some chemistry in all the ways we're talking about. They start to be really good at reading each other's tiny little signals of intention,
Mm-hmm.
and they can anticipate each other in ways that happen faster than the brain even logs it. So shit goes on and you're like, oh my God, how did they know to do that? And like, there's no, it's just cool. It's magical, right? But it's how humans work. So what happens is as one of those lines actually becomes really, really effective, a coach will play them together and that line stays together and da 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 da. Then what happens? Say one of them gets injured, and so then lines have to get shuffled. Or just something starts to fall apart. The game or the team in general is like, maybe they're on a losing streak or whatever, and the coach wants to shake things up and he changes the lines. One way or
Mm-hmm.
another, that line's going to get broken up. And at first, it's pretty common that it's not going to look good with the like rejiggered lines. It
Sure.
takes a little bit of time for that chemistry to rebuild. But it's funny you made this connection because I've not ever thought it articulated in the same way you did, but like that's kind of what silos feel like to me when people talk about them inside organizations. These
Mm-hmm.
silos might actually be teams or functions. They may not be formally on the org chart, but there's something that connects these people in the work they do that also sort of separates them from the other people in the work they do. And there's an adaptive or protective function in that, right? And like I know people in our world often talk about how silos aren't actually evil unto themselves, right? In the same way that hierarchy need not be evil unto itself, structural power rigid hierarchies aren't good, but
Mm-hmm.
functional adaptive, like responsive
Right.
hierarchies that exist for a purpose, those can be very good. So same thing with silos, and this is where I think about this example where the solution isn't, people will usually oversimplify and say silos aren't bad unto themselves because having either protected spaces for things or having the dynamic that you're talking about where it's important people really get to be with each other figuratively or literally serves an important purpose. We're not going to blow up our silos. What's more important is that information can flow across silos. Usually that's how
Mm-hmm.
I hear people say it. Yeah, I say it that way sometimes. But that's also, that risks being misunderstood because it isn't just you got to send information across the silos. Let me send with my like carrier pigeon an envelope on a status update on what we're doing. Let me throw you a couple PowerPoint slides about like this team's working on this and that team's working on that. And if you have any questions, send us an email, and it's like this I think of like tubes, like the internet is just a series of tubes and we're going to just send our information across
Right.
these silos. And I'm like, that ain't it, right? It's much
Mm-hmm.
more about the human information of being
Right.
just with each other. And so the most effective cross silo, first of all, let's quit calling them silos, but the first, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the most effective is start by actually just finding ways for those humans to be interacted with each other. So like, this happens informally. People who naturally learn how to thrive in these environments, they're the ones who they find a way to go cross that silo on their own terms. They
Right.
figure out how to go out for coffee or drinks with somebody on that other team. And someone else will say, oh, they're playing politics or they're sidling up next to that guy just to like get in his good. And it's like, maybe they are. Maybe that's what you have to call it around there. But you can also do this in ways that can feel a little bit more egalitarian. You have folks from across different silos in like groups of 3 or whatever it needs
Mm-hmm.
to be interact with each other for some reason. Create entangled trios. So anyway,
Yeah.
all this. I'm just off on a tangent, but the
Yeah.
hockey line thing is real because a silo does not have to just be like a functional unit in a business. It can also just be that's a click over there. And
Right.
sometimes those things are good in that they have emerged for beneficial reasons and can continue to benefit the organization or the organism. But when they are not productive or adaptive, the solution is not always to just blow them up, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is just create more of the cross interaction that allows people to read each other. So
Yeah, and at its core, I kind of now I want to go. I haven't done one of these projects in a couple minutes, but the next one I'm really going to interrogate the way that people are performance managed and incentivized as
yeah.
well. Is it
Oh
played
yeah.
like a team sport? I mean,
Yeah.
are we going to look at the linebacker and say the linebacker's fired if they can't do their job? In which case, the linebacker is going to lock in and say, "Tell me exactly what my job is, and I will do it. I can't
Of
account for
course.
anyone else." Or are we saying we're going to fire the defensive coordinator if the unit can't function?
Mm-hmm.
And your role is to work with that unit, not figure
Right.
out what you need to do at your
Yeah.
desk in your time alone.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's a huge driver, but I don't
Well,
spend enough time focusing on that, and I should.
yeah. Yeah. I wish I could talk about some details of some projects that I've done, but I just should.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe wants to hear some tea. We can talk one on one. But it's yes, yes.
Yeah.
And the thing is too, this is one of those places where people, you hear people make this point about if everybody here is like working in the service of this, like, here's our value or our mission statement or whatever our stated thing is. Like, we're all here to provide a really good experience for the patients who come into this hospital. Like, no matter what your job is, we're all working towards the goal of someone having a good experience at the hospital and leaving, healthier than they came in or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's like saying that our goal as a team is to win. Like, no shit.
Mm-hmm.
What good does that do you? You
Right,
know what
exactly.
I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you can use it as there's still a motivating, of course. Like, I wouldn't throw it away. I just mean
Right.
that's not going to achieve what you just alluded to.
Yeah.
That's where
But then
people
what?
make stuff. They go, we just need to make sure that everyone's working in towards this, and then let them decide what they need to do. Which in some orgs can work, right? In some orgs, people do really need to play specific roles. In that orchestra, I do need the clarinet players to play the clarinets because we need clarinets. In some orgs, it's, you know what? Here's a shit ton of instruments. Talk amongst yourselves and make it happen. Right. And as long as at the end of the day we've delivered this symphony and it sounded good, like, so like, right. What kind of company are you? And that's often dictated as much by the environmental landscape in which you're doing business as it does in the personal philosophies of the leaders or the founders or the people involved. Because in a healthcare environment, there's too much regulatory structure to say everyone can go play whatever instrument they want. You want to be a doctor? Here you go. Here's your coat for the day. So like there's a little bit of that, but you have to do some introspection, or if you're, in your case, Kyle, if someone's working with you from externally or internally to work through this kind of thing, take a look at where those incentives are and take a look at how the business has to function in terms of where the role and then the performance intersect with each other. The other thing is, we've talked a little bit about this. We don't have to belabor it, but there is still also the fear side of this for folks. So it's not just where are they getting rewarded or who's going to be held responsible for outcomes. Is it at the level of the individual? Is it at the level of the defensive coordinator, conductor? Obviously, it's a little bit of everything. But there's also, we should have included this in the scarcity mindset conversation last week. But there is some of that I think people aren't always... this sounds shitty to say, but I don't think everyone's always self-aware enough to realize that that's powering some of it. So inside an organization where groups of people come together for whatever reason into what somebody else might then lobby that you are a silo, it's not just garden variety, like territorialness. It's not just garden variety. I'm protecting this thing because it's mine. There is this fear that maybe has been instilled over like all of the jobs that someone's had, or as we were saying both earlier here and last time, if someone hits you, blindsides you from one lane coming over, even though you were in the right and they hit you, you're going to become hyper aware, at least for a while. That trauma is going to lead to some hyper awareness and vigilance. And over time, you'll integrate it and you'll adjust and you'll probably hit back to like a normal level or whatever that is. Same thing with work. But I think a lot of our workplaces reinforce the hypervigilance and it never gets a chance to settle. And so, I think so much talk about silos in like the broader, LinkedIn universe just reinforces for people, oh my God, I need to be kind of weird about this. And so that's the other piece at work. And when you mix all these in the soup, it's something.
So, you know what I think is a better model than even jazz, because I think jazz also, it doesn't scale very well. So we like orchestras because they're vast, just like our systems thinking thing. We want to see the inventory of our kingdom. But jazz, it's a 5-piece. That's not what our organization
in a dimly lit club, no less.
Right,
like,
exactly. See the individuals.
The places in which these types of entities do their work.
Right,
anyway,
right. And obviously the jazz metaphor doesn't really resonate all that well either. This one's going to be even worse.
Oh, good.
But yeah, so but it's I think examining it in this conversation is the right way to go. I would never go into a stakeholder conversation and say we need to we need to identify the music scene that's emerging. But a music scene to me
Yeah.
makes a lot more sense as a model. And I'm thinking about specifically right now the Seattle hardcore scene, only because there are like two drummers and two bass players that are in 12 different bands.
Okay, wait. Can we have Trial be like the theme for this show? Okay, we'll talk about this later. Do you know Trial, the
Trial.
band Trial? Okay, we'll talk about
No,
it later.
no. Okay.
Okay,
So,
listeners, go look up Trial. Great band from the 90s and early 2000s.
oh, you have mentioned Trial to me before. Okay. Yes. I'm not too familiar, but you sent me something once. Um, but I'm thinking there are a couple bass players, a couple drummers, and like three vocalists. And there are like these 12, 15 bands or so that have come through. There are a few on the periphery that are like self contained. But for the most part, these are all bands that are on a similar label.
Mhm.
They play at the same venues. They usually share the same lineup. They share practice spaces.
Mhm.
They tour together from time to time. And this is not exclusive to Seattle. Like you can
Mhm.
go to any music scene in any town at any point in time. And the fact that there's a scene at all is because this sort of collective has emerged, not just in the crowd and fandom and audience and participants, but within that structure of bands.
Yeah.
There's two things at play that I see. There's a strong infrastructure of resources, not just in trading talent between one band or another, but we can't. I'm not going to go play this venue by myself. We need to have three openers, and I can't have three openers that are too distant to that doesn't attract the right crowd. The promoter's never going to bring me in, but now that there's like eight of us that they can choose through, they can put together whatever convenient uh, lineup makes sense, and we can have
Uh-huh.
more shows because we've got this critical mass. But at the same time, nobody just wants to be the cover band of the next band in the lineup. Everybody's trying to
Mhm.
differentiate themselves and create their own name at the same time. So there is this reliance on resources, but this identity that pushes, and an identity that also says, like, now that we've got a name, like being part of Seattle grunge or New York hardcore or Delta blues or whatever it is, um, it brings an access to who they are. If you like this band, you'll like that band. The sort of association there, but they also want to not be just that other band. And so they're also pushing against that identity to differentiate and create their own identity that shares an identity as well. To me, that's a better model for what I'd like to see when I go in and I'm supporting these organizational design projects of how do we knock down the silos. Let's start trading some resources and figuring out what that shared infrastructure is.
Shared infrastructure is key, man. And resources, right, is key. What I find interesting about this is I can imagine, I've not ever used a metaphor like this with stakeholders. I'd be
Sure.
curious if you do. I want to hear how people respond.
I don't know
My
if they're
Here's
tapped
my first,
into scenes.
well, you could probably find some more mainstreamy kind of versions of this, but um, the first thing that stands out to me, though, that is different in this example from what I think a lot of people would want to latch onto is like, what's the shared goal?
Hmm.
And I don't say that with it's not a given that that would necessarily be important. But I
Right.
think that's what would be the thing that a lot of organizational leaders would go, well, what joins all of us in our work is our shared goal, which aside from profit is
Mm-hmm.
this other thing, which is actually secondary to profit, but or drives profit. But what is the shared goal? And I like this example, even though I don't know if people will actually do well with it if you use it in a workplace. But I think it's good for our conversation because
Mm-hmm.
what's the shared goal for a music scene? I would almost be willing, without doing a lot more thinking, which I probably should do before I say this, is there probably doesn't need to be one,
Yep. I
because
agree.
that's the whole point, is that this is an emergent and self-organizing community of humans who are doing what they're doing for reasons that aren't necessarily goal oriented. And
Mm-hmm.
right, that should like set off a whole bunch of bells for people who do work in some proximity to complexity science, is that idea about goal or target driven effort. You can have things that you acknowledge are more desirable than other things, and you can engage in some prefigurative design and thinking that is trying to achieve good things in the future. You can have that, but that vector theory of change concept, I still think, is so hard for people to truly internalize. And a music scene is a really good way to think about that, because the Boston hardcore scene isn't a community that has gathered around a shared goal, which is
Right.
to achieve a certain thing. It's a group that shares other things,
Mm-hmm.
maybe interests, maybe aesthetic tastes, something about ideology or identity, but that nonetheless they achieve things and create things that do
Yeah.
have an impact and change the current state into future states by putting music in the world or performing shows or whatever. So the reason I say all that, because I imagine most people listening would probably kind of be thinking in some similar sense, but I wonder now, putting that example in front of people, inside organizations who are so used to thinking that we need a shared mission statement or
Mm-hmm.
shared goal. Yes, shared goals are critical, but they don't always have to take the form of
Yeah.
the goal the way that we're so trained to think about it. And so what would be the organizational equivalent of the music scene metaphor? Like, are
I
there any
mean,
organizations out there that actually operate this way that, you know,
wouldn't that be something? Because what's coming up for me
Topology
now?
does, but it's just two of us. So.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's
Yeah.
good. So I imagine bands themselves have shared goals. That's kind of what keeps them together. That's driving.
Mm-hmm.
At least most that I'm familiar with are ones that have stuck together for a period of time anyway. But yeah, as a larger organism, it's not a particular singular shared goal, and that's because it acknowledges that there are different hierarchies within that larger organism of a music scene, right?
Yeah.
There are more influential ones that are bringing other bands along. There are ones that are the sort of super groups that have collected a few other people and they might be a little bit newer. There are ones that have unique identities that draw a great crowd. There are ones that are just old school. They're the OGs in the group, and they haven't hit any level of fame necessarily, but they are a
Yeah.
familiar mainstay and the backbone of the whole thing. And so I think that's important in that larger emergent
Well, and
organism.
I would say too, it's not even just hierarchy. I mean, we kind of said this earlier too, the same idea, but like the granularity at which you're actually asking this question. So,
Mm-hmm.
the individual band members have some, I mean, they may or may not have goals in the sense we're talking about goals,
Sure,
but like you ask somebody, like, why are you doing, maybe purpose is the other word here that I have
sure.
intentionally avoided, but that's its own thing too.
Mm-hmm.
People say, I just want to make cool music. And a band might be like, we want to make cool music, we want to make it big. Or other bands might be like, don't want to make it big, but we want to like share this message and get people thinking differently about these topics, whatever, right? Like they might argue that those are purpose instead of goal. And so I can hear the echo, that can go, that can be at a zoomed out low granularity, or that can be at a zoomed in high granularity. Just like in an organization, an individual designer might be like, I just want to make some cool shit that I'm proud of. And the team might be like, well, we exist as a team to like serve this purpose or whatever. And then the organization as a whole. But take my earlier comment about goals now and replace it with purpose. Like, does an organization need to have shared purpose?
I um that's I'll give you an example of actually where it's worked against. So there's
Good
a
dodge.
band from the Hudson Valley that I won't name because if you're into prog, you know them. Um, but I came up with these guys, and from the time that they were playing at the community center to the time that's now like they're on the cover of Guitar Magazine and that kind of stuff. And the the scene itself wanted to be acknowledged that we're not New York, but we are something different. But we're adjacent, and it's more the and it was more of an indie scene there. But it was unique, and it had a lot of power and energy back in the '90s. And the band, this particular band, was a bit more ambitious than others. There was almost this, I don't want to say shared agreement, but there was this shared vision among multiple bands that one of us is going to get big, and then we'll bring the other along. Every time we get we move up the pecking order of, we're playing at the community center, and so we're going to invite all our friends to play with us. So now we're playing at a real venue, and that venue might only have 150 people, and it might be on a Tuesday night, but we're still going to bring a friend or two along. Now we're playing at a bigger 600 seat show, and we're on a little regional label or something like that. We're still going to bring a friend or two along. But when these guys made the leap into a national touring headlining band, I'm freely saying they're from the Hudson Valley because they disavowed their relationship to the Hudson Valley altogether. And it almost crashed the entire thing because there was so much animosity between the other bands that were saying, we've taken care of each other for almost a decade now. Like, I don't trust you. It's that PTSD. It's that getting hit in that accident. Nobody trusted each other anymore. The shared value became the resentment for this other band that took off. That
Yep.
didn't produce anything healthy or good. It didn't create a better community. It created a
Yep.
bunch of people getting drunk and lamenting about the future that they were hoping for. That's been
Yep.
robbed to some extent. So that shared goal, or even within that band, when they got signed, the moment they got signed, or before they were all there in the process of signing, they fired their drummer because their drummer had just had a kid. They've got a 2-year-old, and their goals didn't align. This is probably going to hold us back if we have to wait for you to be ready to come tour with this.
Yep.
Those shared goals were detrimental for that whole scene and all those people. And it might have been that it was just too explicit.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but yeah, this is such a great question of these things arrive without an agreed upon destination,
Yep.
and they still flourish.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's sometimes a little too hard to go right in and say, forget the goal or the
Mhm.
outcome or target driven approach, and to say, forget purpose. Because to do that, you're going to, like you've said in other places, I think quite articulately, you are going to risk having someone just shut down and get into a non-listening posture altogether. And then you've lost
Mhm.
any chance of collaboration anyway. So you gotta tread lightly, but in safe places, I'll say it. Forget your goal driven, target driven, outcome driven approach. Forget purpose, at least at the organizational or like shared group level, and
Mhm.
certainly at the explicit level, which, this is where, when we all talk about oblique approaches and da da da, and this is where John Kay's book Obliquity, it really is good, because it really does address this exact kind of topic around
Mhm.
the downside and the ineffective, if not, counterproductiveness of explicit, purpose kind of outcome driven types of things. And you can be oblique, and like saying something like, just want to make good music versus
Right.
I want to have a record deal by this amount of time and do this and this and
Right.
this, can backfire in all the ways you just told that story about. So
Yeah.
I do. It's funny to think about this though at this level. The music example is really good because, how do you begin to broach a way of working that doesn't require shared purpose or explicitly stated goals? And we're not saying like
Mm.
throw them away. I mean, we just had a great
Right.
chat with Kenny about goals and measurement of success or progress in
Yep.
ways that are actually complexity savvy.
Yep.
But in the way that most folks are trained to talk about purpose in a business setting,
Mhm.
it's so interesting to think, like, how do you get people to kind of, I'm not going to convince you to stop
Mhm.
thinking that way, but what I'm going to do is, let's just experiment with some ways of working that basically just downplay that stuff altogether. Like, we can just put it
Yeah.
on mute. We don't have to throw it away because it's like a security blanket at this point for a lot of leaders. but could we kind of just put that channel on mute and try these other things? I mean, that's kind of what a lot of it boils down to in my work, but like
Sure.
got me thinking a lot about,
And
could you be more
I'll
explicit about it with people and have them not shut off to you? I don't know.
And I'll throw out another cautionary tale of when the exploitation or the assertion of a goal comes from the exterior. When we watched the Seattle grunge scene come apart, there were
Yeah.
a few successes in there, and so every bunch of people show up with blank checks in hand, with the assumption that the thing this scene needs, that these artists need, is money and resources and the ability to tour and get into studios. And that wasn't the case for all of them. They started to segregate who had that degree of hunger and who wanted to be part
Yeah.
of that exploitation versus the ones that just wanted to play music. And it turned out that Kurt Cobain ultimately just wanted to play music and was in a awful life position because
Yeah.
he was kind of strung between those two realities. And so when we go in and we're forcing that, you don't have a goal, how much damage can be done by trying to create that? And so I'm going to come out of this conversation now very skeptical and examining my use of brand canvases, which I have not used in a very long time, but that was sort of okay. Well, if we're just forming a new thing, or
Yeah.
we're all kicking off a project, let's create some alignment around this. Let's
Mm.
go to our brand canvas. That's an easy thing that people can digest very quickly and people are familiar with and non-threatening. But at the same time, what are we leaving off?
Yeah.
What are we not allowing for?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that because I try. I mean, I'm lucky in that a lot of the work I do, I'm able to kind of just sidestep the need to have a shared stated goal
Mm-hmm.
or purpose, either because an organization or a team, when they hire me, they might already have one that they say, here's what we all agree on, but we need to sort out this, or this. And often what I can do is like just avoid interacting with the shared goal that they've
Mm-hmm.
stated because it's not material to what we're doing. And for all the reasons we've just talked about,
Mm-hmm.
it's not productive to anchor to it. But I also don't have to like put a target or crosshairs on it and get people fought up and defensive about it. So like it is a
Right.
little bit like I'm realizing right now I kind of do what I was just wondering about without realizing I do just mute that channel,
Mm.
and then I say, what can we achieve when we don't worry about a shared purpose? Which, like, again, I'm sure there are people listening to this and they're like, what the hell are you two talking about? Like,
Right.
how do you achieve positive, desirable outcomes without having a shared purpose? Without having shared goals, without having targets, how do you even know what good looks like? Like, but I just give you a knowing smirk and say,
Right.
what
It
if you
happens.
what if you try? What if you
Mm-hmm.
experiment and see what happens? But
Mm-hmm.
but again, I mean, there's a difference between us and folks that we might joke with in this community, and then folks who have far less exposure to some of the actual the rigor of the understanding of the dynamics that lead to these kind of practices. And so I can't ask someone else in the, I can't go into a giant like healthcare organization and be like, don't worry about your shared purpose to improve
Right.
human happiness and health. I mean, we don't care about that. That's not what I'm saying. But oh
At a
gosh,
micro level, we do it though. We facilitate a workshop, and people are all right. So what are our determined outcomes when we walk out the door? What are we going to have in hand? And we
yeah,
try to push back on let's
yeah,
just focus on what we're doing. Let's focus on the process and the people
yeah.
in the room. The
Well,
the outcomes will reveal themselves.
and so much is like not every, but so much of those kind of instincts are driven by a system, a diffused system of
Mm-hmm.
expectations. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost never the individual who's asking, who's like, well, what are the outcomes going to be? It's not that they individually are, it's that somebody else has made it clear that that needs to be something that happens. There's so much
Right.
of that. I mean, even this like example I keep bringing up every once in a while about, making lots of journey maps or blueprints, and being asked to like, well, how many is it going to be? Or personas. This was one for many years, a project where you
Mm-hmm.
were going to develop personas. This is
Yeah.
going back a while now because nobody wants personas anymore. But
You'd be
when
surprised.
everybody wanted personas, you'd have to put into a statement of work how many personas we're going to develop. And
Mm-hmm.
like constantly at MadPow, we had to have this conversation where it was like, we can't say because we're going to do a whole bunch of sense making work up front. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't even know if personas are the relevant thing that need to emerge from this work. But like, we got to at least put that word in there because that's what you
Yeah.
came to us asking for. And then it was this battle, because what would happen is most of the practitioners would really bristle against this for good reason, because
Mm-hmm.
how many personas or archetypes emerge from a sense making practice is completely contingent on what it is that you actually engage in through the sense making and what it uncovers. So like, but a client who doesn't do this work isn't going to know and understand that. So do you try to diplomatically explain the rationale and refuse to put a number of personas in your contract? Do you try to explain and do some education about why that's not relevant?
Mm-hmm.
Do you just say, do you acquiesce and say, it'll be 5 to 10, depending on what comes out of it? Like, what do you do? And like, which of those strategies is both effective in terms of sell the fucking work, but
Right.
at the same time doesn't set you up for failure or doesn't harm your relationship? Because I don't know about
Mm-hmm.
you, but like, if I'm a client and I think I need some personas and I've done a little bit of reading and I think I'm probably going to need 5 because I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm talking about. And then I go and ask a really, really well regarded agency if you could help me create some personas for this user audience that I don't know a lot about. And instead of going, yes, we can help you with that, they come back and say, you don't know if it's going to be 5, okay? Like, you already are creating this dynamic. So anyway, it's just, I love this in a way because it is, I think, a central challenge for so many people in any kind of work. Forget about complexity, just any work at all, that it is contingent and is emergent. And I do have a ton of empathy because for the people who are asking for things like, what are the outcomes of this workshop going to be? How many personas are we going to get out of this project? What is the thing you're going to deliver look like? In fact, can you tell me exactly what it is right now? And it's like, you get bristly because you're like, I'm not a factory. I'm not a persona
Right.
factory where you just put some things in me and I spit out a persona. Like, but the thing is, most people who are asking for that stuff, they know that. They don't think you're a literal factory. They don't think you're a monkey or somebody just banging away on the keyboard producing stuff under command. But they don't know how else to think about it. They don't have alternative mental schemas
Yeah.
for this kind of work. And they're not going to get one in the 2 weeks of conversation you have while you're scoping the project. They might
No.
start to develop it through the collaboration that you have together, but you got to earn the right to have the collaboration first. So
Yeah.
thank you for everybody listening to my TED talk about that. But like, if you are a person who is involved in scoping anything, whether it's a single workshop, you're inside, you're not a consultant, you're an internal member, and you're just trying to like, you know, advocate for a thing. You want to do a workshop, you want to try this method, you are still selling. Or if you are literally in the business of selling as a professional services firm or individual, that's my like TED talk to you guys. Hard earned perspective, hard fought, and not always won on my end. But like, I had such a hard time with this early in my career. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't even because I was like, what nerve they have trying to tell me how many personas they're gonna. It was an educational instinct. It was my need, the psychological trait need for cognition. You ever heard of that?
I've never heard of that.
We'll come back to that sometime.
Okay.
uh High need for cognition, but it's associated with expositional kind of like want to explain. And so young
Okay.
Jen was like, oh, this client doesn't understand that this is an incredibly emergent process. We really need to explain to them. Think how many of those
Yep.
projects actually
I feel
sold.
that.
So
Yeah.
just take it from me, guys. It's almost always going to be better to find a way to just say, yes, here's a concrete outcome. Make it as hedged or gray area or rangy as possible. Leave yourself as much, degrees of freedom as you
Mm-hmm.
can, but try to have a
Yep.
little empathy for the person who's asking for that, because it's not because they're a moron or because they're just radically committed to like misunderstanding you. It's because they're working in a system that is requiring that. It's not even incentivizing it, it's requiring it. You're not going to change it if you can't just get in there to begin with. So
Yeah. That was a big thing. You're right. Like, realizing this was huge. And I did some research on this within Capital One and to bring into research teams, because research teams were upset. Why do I keep getting asked to learn about a thing, but they already know what they want to learn. And I'm held accountable to deliver. We stopped calling it research with some of our stakeholders,
More
and we
like
just called it
validation.
validation.
Yeah.
Yep. And
Yeah.
they would actually request, can you go validate this for me?
Mm-hmm.
And when I had this aha that said, we have to stop treating stakeholders as if they're stakeholders, we have to think of them as impacted people within the entire system. We're not
Mm-hmm.
just trying to figure out how to integrate with users. We need to figure out how to integrate with our stakeholders just as much, and internally as well as the design infrastructure that's a
Yeah.
participant in this. And what I had to illustrate for people, and I drew up obviously I built almost a sloppy service blueprint that had too many squiggly lines to really be a recognizable service blueprint. But I had to explain, before design is ever even called, there's that annual strategy session that says, here's what my goals are at the very
Yep.
top level. And that
Yep.
starts to trickle down a little bit and become, here's what I need resources for. And if
Yeah.
our transaction is, you give me the resources and I'll give you these deliverables,
Yeah.
whatever that is, whether it's a metric or a new thing or a repair to something, whatever that happens to be. And that has to become refined over time, because you're fighting for, no, I need to be prioritized above the 50 other things that are on the table right now. So that needs to become more and more explicit. By the time it makes it to the design org, it is, here are your instructions, execute. And design immediately bristles at that and says, I'm not working neck down here. I'm a creative.
Yeah.
I'm a designer. I'm going to create. I want to have autonomy and influence over this space. Either autonomy as a team or as an individual. Everybody wants to. Not everybody. A lot of people want to be the Steve Jobs in the room and
I mean, even if
take the
not that,
reins
still
somewhere.
sets the
And
stage. You know, you want
sure,
to
of
feel.
course,
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
that's the extreme version of it. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
but the aha was, you're right, shit. So how do we get into the decision making process around, what are we actually looking at here? What might arrest or accomplish the things that we're
Yeah.
intending on doing? We don't get included in those conversations early
Yeah.
enough. And that's when I moved into strategy and I started building those frameworks. That's what I said. This complexity, all these complexity tools are purpose built for that level of discovery. That's where our integration needs to be. And
Yeah.
then when it's gotten explicit enough through that degree of refinement, then you can go find somebody that will execute it for you.
Yeah.
But that breakdown was not
Yeah.
apparent. And it was
Yeah.
not even to me until I really dove into it.
It's funny because you think that people inside an organization. So as an outsider,
Mm-hmm.
ironically, even though that stuff's not visible to
Mm-hmm.
outsiders, it is very visible because I'm an
Yep.
outsider. So I am more like a conductor and can see the whole system, la la la, holistic, whatever.
Right.
No, not really. But like, I'm more like an audience member in the
Mm-hmm.
symphony. I can see the conductor and the orchestra and the people running around backstage. Anyway,
Right.
but there's
The critic.
definitely, yes, there's, it's interesting to me though how often people inside an organization don't really see how that all plays out. But of course, if you think about it, it makes total sense because they are embedded within the system, and so they can't have the holistic view vantage point, right? How often is Dave Snowden on about that, right? Like, it's not realistic to actually want or expect people to have a holistic view. In fact, if you want emergence and other things that support innovation, you actually can't have people all having a holistic view of the system, because then
Sure.
the system is not going to behave in that way regardless. Right. But coming back to that point though, even when people do gain that understanding of how that sort of planning cycle works and thus how the sort of downstream of influence kind of flows, I think a lot of folks' instinct is immediately like, okay, how do I get there? How do I climb like salmon, like up this waterfall and hop up to the point where like the strategy meeting is happening? And I think in some organizations that is part of the plan or part of the strategy, the meta strategy for the
Mine.
person.
Yeah.
That's how it works. But as this funny as you were describing this, is kind of what I thought of. It's timely because Winter Olympics. I don't watch like speed skating or whatever, but I happened to see last night one of the speed skating events, like a relay. And again, there's another area I shouldn't even talk about because I don't know anything about it, but it looked to me, for the couple seconds I saw it on screen and then I went and did something else, when they do the speed skating relay, the people who are not currently racing, they do stay in motion and they like skate around the inside, I think. need to look this up. But in the part that I saw, it looked kind of like the non-actively racing skaters kept moving, and they're moving sort of in on the inner so that they could be lined up so that when their teammate was arriving at the place where they needed to relay and switch, that they would be like arriving there. So unlike track and field, where they kind of just hang out and they only start moving as the other runner comes up to them. But then there is a period where they're both running, of course, but when they hand the baton off, but the like runners sort of standing there waiting.
Mm-hmm.
But skating, for whatever reason, and I understand the mechanics of why this is true, but in this sport, it looked like the skater doesn't just stand there ready. They keep moving so that they can then time themselves to like move up into that. And so in a way, I think it's more like that, in that, this is a weird metaphor, but it's more like I, as an outsider, as a consultant, as a trusted advisor, I might get invited in nowhere near that annual strategy session.
Right.
I might get invited in a couple cycles or levels of influence down.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the things that I can really provide of greatest value need to be part of that conversation in the strategy meeting. But I may not know those leaders personally. I may not have worked with that team. Like there are any number of reasons. Now, I know there are also consultants out there who just go right at that group. Mm-hmm. And I do in some organizations. I am plugged into that leadership level. I know there are some organizational, consultants who focus on like boards. There are people who make that group their target for this reason, but I actually find that less effective because it's like you're trying to enter a building on like the 10th floor. You got to scale the outside of the building to get up to the 10th floor. Whereas it's a little easier to just walk in the front door sometimes. And then you just walk in at the ground level and you make friends with the concierge, you make friends with the front desk, you make friends with the janitor, you make friends, Yeah. And then they will like, okay, I'll introduce you here. So I might enter like that skater on the inner loop. What I'm doing might feel like wasteful cycles that aren't really moving anything forward, but what they are getting me, firstly, they're accomplishing things. Second, they're getting me into a place where when the timing is right, now I'm over here in this lane. And now I'm moving at this. Now imagine that happening again and again and again. So another lane happening, I might be working on this cycle for a little while. Again, is it futile? Is it wasteful? It depends on how you look at it. I don't see it that way, but I know there are bigger things to happen. And at some point, I'm going to line up and then there's going to be a little baton handoff and now I'm over here. And I don't think of that the same as a salmon jumping up through levels of waterfalls or somebody trying to like politically work their way up a ladder. I see it more as working through the dynamics that happen at different scales and pace layers in an organization, because that gives you such really good perspective. But it also gives you the ability to timing, right? We talked about earlier, to time the relevance of what you have to offer. Right. So I might have to wait like a satellite launch. I know there might only be a window that this organization does its strategic planning every year in December. And I just met this leadership team in March. So am I going to just not talk to them again until December and say, here's where I can come in and do some STRM mapping for you? I'm going to talk to that team right now, find out where they need support, find out what they might be able to use, find out what we could do together that could help even on a quote smaller or less influential scale, but could still help them in a way that now when those windows open, I move up. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I hope somebody listening might think about it when we're in that mode of despair where you're like, God damn it, everything we're doing is just being handed down. How do I get a seat at the table? It's not a seat at the table, guys. It's like a speed skating short track race. And really for you, it's not how do you get over there. It's just keep moving in the same direction. And eventually something's going to line up and you'll hook into some other new influential kind of place. I don't know.
That's the satellite launch is perfect. And
we'll go with that one. We'll cut the others.
It's the opposite of the work I've done when we bring in a PwC or Deloitte, and not as individuals, but we say we need somebody to come in and write 8 personas for us. Yeah. They show up and say, I will get you 8 personas. Yeah. And in those conversations I have with them, there are plenty of times they go, this doesn't make any sense. This is contrary to everything we're learning. But my statement of work says 8 personas. You're going to have it and I'm going to leave and we're going to cash the check. And that's going to be the end of our relationship. So, and we continue to go back because they deliver exactly what they say they're going to deliver. But
well, that's like, honestly, I'll say it this way. there's a choice you have to make when you're independent. And is it that's the way you want to make your money? And if that's the way you want to make your money, I make no
Sure.
judgment.
Yep.
That isn't the way I want to make my money. You know what I mean? So like that,
Yeah.
then you kind of look at yourself like, how do I compete with that? And the reality is if somebody wants to hire somebody else to do a thing where the outcome's not actually as important as we want to pretend it is, we just need the performance theater here. That's not your people. You don't want that. But in the organizations where they will engage you and they will appreciate that the statement of work should be more suggestive and vector oriented and not the explicit stated thing. I think a lot about, so go back to the satellite launching thing. This phrase was in my head this morning from a conversation, and so I figure I'll put it here. A lot of this is about increasing the surface area for serendipity, right? And I know other people have said very similar things. I don't even know like who or whatever I would cite. There's probably a way more poetic way to say that. But a lot about
Kaufman talks about this a lot.
Does he? Does he use that phrase or something similar? Did I like
opportunities for serendipity, connections that create serendipity, that kind of stuff?
Like, this phrase was in my head, and I know it's like I'm plagiarizing somebody.
Surface area is good.
I can't play where it came from, but regardless, it's like that's it for me. Is like you got to intensively like expand the surface area in which these serendipitous little windows for a satellite launch could actually appear. I mean, that's what sense and response all about. Be good at sensing and then be good at responding. But like, there's a little bit of a difference to that when you're thinking about being an independent, a freelancer, a contractor, an outside consultant or whatever, or an internal person who's just looking for the chance to advocate for the thing they know that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm looking at the time and I got to run soon.
That's a solid mic drop. The surface area for serendipity. I love that.
The S's make for the good alliteration. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Perfect.
Well, thank you. We'll just title this one Surface Area for Serendipity. That's also going to be my new band name. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. On that note, I'm going to hit stop so I don't ruin it.
Cool.